This week on the show, the coal mine that's supposed to be closed, but where they just keep digging. Hello and welcome to the programme. This week we're in Merthyr Tydfil, home to the country's largest open cast coal mine, and also the site of a big row with the company here accused of operating the mine after their permission to do so has expired. And the company saying they won't have enough money to restore this site when they're done. Well, we'll come to that a little bit later, but also on the programme, an environmental bomb. Why Ukraine is calling the destruction of the Novocarkovka dam the worst environmental disaster since Chernobyl. Stay inside, wear a mask if you go out, not a COVID throwback, but the reality for tens of millions of Americans and Canadians as dangerous wildfire smog spreads. And how this place will soon be transformed into Britain's latest rainforest. But first to the big scar on the hill behind me, home to the Fosse Fran mine, Britain's biggest open cast coal mine, and a source of controversy from the moment it opened till the present day. This is Britain's biggest open cast coal mine, and it isn't supposed to be operating anymore. But when Sky News went to film, it clearly was. Fosse Fran in Merthyr Tydfil has been extracting coal for over 15 years, but its permission to mine ran out last September.
It should close. It should have shut down on the 6th of September last year. They shouldn't be coaling anymore, and they should now be in full restoration phase.
The planning consent was for 15 years and 3 months of coal extraction, and then to move into 2 to 3 years of restoration and of the mine.
Basically, they've just carried on working. It's business as usual. Problem is, the price of coal is so high at the moment, it's a license to print money.
I've been getting photographs, updates from people living in the area, from campaigners saying this mining is still continuing, and nobody seems to be able to understand why it hasn't changed.
Well, that includes me. How come it's still operating if it's been told to stop?
The basic fact of this is our planning system is weighted in favour of large companies. It's not weighted in favour of local communities. Money gets extracted, it goes to the people who own these companies, but it's not the local area that ever benefits. And that is the history of what's happened with mining in these valleys for years.
If you live here, you or a member of your family might work in this mine, or you might benefit from local services that are partly funded by the money that comes from here. So you might be in support of it.
Certainly the people who locally have got in touch with me, who live locally, are angry that they are being choked by these fumes. In this area, they are horribly, frighteningly high levels of respiratory disease that go back decades because of the legacy of coal mining. And so, we need to be thinking of the air that we breathe.
The local authorities are aware of Fosse Fran's continuing operation. When we asked them about what they were doing about it, Merthyr Tydfil Council told us they had issued an enforcement notice. The notice requires the mining company to cease extraction of coal from the land and cease carrying out development at the land other than in accordance with the approved restoration and management strategy. The mine operator has until the 25th of July to comply. Failure to do so may lead to a further escalation of enforcement action. Data from the Coal Authority suggests that nearly 200,000 tonnes of coal have been dug since the mine's permission ran out. Most of that coal goes from here to the Tata Steelworks at Port Talbot, but some goes to power Britain's much-loved heritage steam trains. They like to get their black gold close to home.
Without Fosse Fran, ourselves and those other industries are effectively dragging coal from all around the world, from Colombia, from Australia, from the US, from the South Africa, up until Ukraine, from Russia. What about the emissions from actually dragging coal halfway round the world? In the short term, it does seem a bit daft when actually we could be mining it here in the UK, and an unintended consequence of that short-sighted decision impacts a high-profile user, massive to UK heritage culture and the visitor economy, like heritage steam railways and traction engines and so on and so forth.
Much of the historical mine working here has been restored to a semi-natural state, including this sloping pasture, which was once part of the Fosse Fran mine. But they now say that if they have to halt operations, they won't have the money to landscape the rest. The locals are not amused.
It's our land. It's Merthyr Common, and it's owned by the local authority. In effect, our land, where we have rights of way on it and rights to
grazing rights.
Safe access. There's grazing rights on there. What was promised to us? There was no good side to having to live by the side of an open cast coal mine for 15 years, other than what they promised to do at the end of it. Nothing else was of any use to us.
Sky News asked the mine operators for comment but didn't get a response. But they told Wales Online that the company is in active discussions for a safe cessation of coaling, which includes ongoing restoration. This isn't a one-off. In a country that has declared a climate emergency, 2 other mines in South Wales look set to reopen. We asked the Welsh Government about Fosse Fran and the 2 other mines, but they didn't comment on them specifically. In a statement, they insisted that they have a planning presumption against mining and would only give the go-ahead in exceptional circumstances in the context of decarbonisation. But sometimes their hands are tied by the UK government. So, might old King Coal be about to rise from the ashes?
The landscape that we see, it wears the scars of our history. You know, some of the coal tips are still here. We are reminded every day of the danger that those tips could actually pose for our communities. There are so many reasons why coal mining should be in our past. It should not be in our future.
This week brought news of the destruction of the Novocarkovka dam in Ukraine, unleashing waters from one of the biggest reservoirs in Europe. It's caused a terrible human tragedy. But as Alex Crawford told us from Kherson, it's not just about the people, it's harming the environment too.
We're out with another one of the relief crews. They've been going on all week. A number of these rescues or delivery of supplies have been done in the middle of an artillery barrage or shelling. We were at an evacuation point, a number of them, as they came under fire. This has all happened in the middle of a war zone, and you've got to remember that all this water that you see around us is full of sewage. Large sections of it are contaminated. There was a release of hundreds of tons of oil from the hydroelectric plant itself. There are toxic chemicals in the water, and this is covering, just in the Kherson region itself, something like 600 square kilometers of land. Huge areas, swathes of the countryside, which grew agricultural crops, have been contaminated. President Zelensky has called it ecocide. He said it's similar to unleashing an environmental bomb, akin to using a weapon of mass destruction. And others have likened it to the biggest catastrophe in this region since Chernobyl. It is likely to have a huge impact, not just short term, but long term, because this, Ukraine and this area, is really the breadbasket for the world.
Well, I'm joined now by Ukrainian environment and conservation expert Bohdan Prot, who's a leading member of the National Academy of Sciences as well. Bohdan, thank you very much for joining us. Tell me, what do you think will be the impact overall on the nature of this area, both above and below the dam?
It's getting suddenly water to the area when water almost never been before. People suddenly got trapped, animals got trapped, and many of them can easily die. And then when you've got pollution, which is like garbage dams or different domestic animals, even birds, they can be washed away and distributed over the area. Number of animals being washed away with the water downstream, and they now searching for new habitats. Water, when it's rise, it might kill them very simply because they wanted to find another habitats to migrate, and they will be not to do it very quickly, to find a suitable territory. The same wetland animals like beaver. You have seen the picture beavers running on the street of Kherson. He is desperately trying to find habitats. Will he find the habitats? It's difficult.
Above the dam, how big will the effect be and how long term?
You've got to imagine this water reservoir is 230 kilometers long. So it's a huge, huge area with water. And they are deep, somewhere up to 16 meters. So it's a huge amount. And then this was area with quite well developed over the time spawning ground and many fish stocks. And people been relying local economy on it. So when water is run away very quickly, you have seen this amount of fish which just been laying. It's just like effect before huge wave on the sea, when the sea is going away in some way, and then you can see huge number of fish laying ground.
Do you think this is ecocide?
Yes, in long term, it's very close to that. It's definitely when the first impression, people emotionally calling that. But when we look for the long term and consider the size of it and amount what we lost, I would say it's definitely ecocide.
It's been a very dry early summer here. The twigs and brush are just crackling beneath my feet, but this is nothing compared to what's going on in Canada, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called the early fire season scary as so many blazes are breaking out across the country.
Over 400 fires are burning in almost every Canadian province, from east to west, following a warmer and drier than average spring. Meteorologists say this cluster of fires in a remote area of Quebec was started by lightning storms, and they're causing thick smoke to spread south. That blanket of smog has been shrouding major cities on both sides of the border, with tens of millions of people living under air quality alerts. Major cities like New York, Toronto, Ottawa and Detroit have at times had the worst air quality on the planet this week, with Thursday marking the worst air quality day the US has experienced since 2006. So what's going on and how unusual is this? Canada is home to enormous swathes of boreal forest and is no stranger to wildfires. But the extent of the fires and how early in the year they are is causing alarm. This graph shows the number of hectares burnt as each of the last 8 wildfire seasons have progressed. Over 3.5 million hectares have already burnt in 2023. That's 13 times what's expected by this point in the year, putting the country already on track for its worst wildfire season ever, one that's only just started. So what's it been like to live with that level of smog? Sky's US correspondent Mark Stone sent us this report from Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia, the smoke sits heavy. It's hanging and only moving slowly across a vast part of the northeastern United States. And this is where it's been worst through the day. At the city's airport, flights were paused for a few hours. Visibility was so poor. And don't assume this is just cloud. Were it not for the smoke, this would have been a blue sky day. Within the city itself, though, it's harder to see that the air is quite so bad. On Rocky's steps, the city officials' advice to stay indoors had not filtered through. Are you worried? Does it overly concern you?
Well, we did look into getting masks, the N95s this morning, but we're not that worried. Actually, today looks better than yesterday, even though they said it's worse.
Yeah.
I'm being careful. They don't care, so.
You're not too worried, sir?
I'm not worried. I never smoked in my life, so I guess I'm smoking a little bit. But
The striking thing is that you can smell and feel the heaviness of smoke produced by wildfires well over 1,000 miles to the north of here. This is central Philadelphia, where the air quality index was well over 300 at one point. That is hazardous and it is record-breaking.
The scale goes to 500. So this is terrible. That's what that, I don't know how else to say that, but it just, just dense particulates. You don't want to breathe it in.
Out of Philadelphia, north through New Jersey towards New York, the smoke persists. And this Manhattan time-lapse shows what New Yorkers have experienced. Scientists have concluded it represents the worst air pollution for America in recent history. The scale of the cause, the source, is just staggering. From Canada's west coast to its east coast, forests are burning. The country is set for its worst year on record already, and we are far from being at the peak of the season. In a time where our climate seems to be changing so fast, this is yet another hint that the consequences of extreme weather events impact well beyond where they hit. Mark Stone, Sky News in Philadelphia.
Also in the news this week, Labour has U-turned on its policy to invest £28 billion a year on green investments if it forms the next government. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said the size of the so-called Green Prosperity Plan would now only be a target, and blamed what she said was Conservative mismanagement of the economy. The Tories had criticised the plan as unaffordable. In a week where scientists declared an El Niño, a natural weather event likely to heat an already warming planet, a new study predicted that the Arctic could be free of summer sea ice as soon as the next decade, irrespective of how quickly we cut emissions. It could indicate that a climate tipping point has already been passed. Sea ice reflects the sun's radiation, but the darker ocean absorbs it. An ice-free Arctic therefore means a faster warming planet. New maps released this week by the British Antarctic Survey show how much the ice has already retreated in both the Antarctic and the Arctic from its average over the last 30 years, shown with the purple line, down to its average for the last 10 years, shaded in purple.
After the break, some better news as we hear about Devon's newest nature reserve, where they're hoping to revive some native temperate rainforest. And defying expectations, record numbers of puffins nest on a Welsh island. Now, earlier in the year, we told you about the history of temperate rainforest in Britain and plans to protect and expand the small fragments that remain. Well, now, the Devon Wildlife Trust have purchased a lease on a big stretch of land near Totnes, where they plan to expand much more of that temperate rainforest. Sky's journalists have been the first to get a look, and Dan Whitehead sent us this report.
Tucked away amid the sweeping moorlands and giant talls of Dartmoor is something very rare.
We're coming to the end of the meadow now, and we're just walking into the rainforest.
Hidden out of sight, Atlantic woodland, our answer to a rainforest, thrives. There are no monkeys swinging from trees, but there is a carbon-trapping, habitat-rich environment.
We are in a temperate rainforest. Most people have heard of tropical rainforests like the Amazon, the Congo and Indonesia. Not so many people have heard about temperate rainforest. And why it's a rainforest is because of the constant high humidity and for most of the year, not today, but for the most of the year, very high rainfall. And because of that, you don't just see trees, you see all sorts of things growing on trees. So all around us, you can hear the water bubbling away, but every branch, every twig you see has got moss and lichen growing on it.
Centuries of woodland removal and intensive agriculture have seen a huge reduction in forests like this.
Dense, lush rainforest like this used to cover around a fifth of the UK. It's now understood to be less than 1%. It's why the Devon Wildlife Trust is about to start planting a whole new one.
On the outskirts of Totnes, Harry and his team will be transforming this old farmland into temperate rainforest, planting clusters of oak, birch, willow and hazel. It will take hundreds of years, and the Trust says British rainforests will cope well with our changing climate.
We have to bear in mind that while climate is changing, a lot of these forces, droughts, disease and things like that, they have happened in our landscape before, and most of the native species are quite well adapted. So if we give nature a helping hand but let nature lead us, then I think we have the best chances of seeing this forest survive and thrive.
The rainforest will go alongside a new self-sufficient community on the farm, including regenerative farming and more than 40 eco-homes.
The concept is that human development doesn't necessarily have to be negative for the planet. I think humans live with this sort of idea that development is always bad, but if it's designed really, really well and carefully, then it can actually have positive impacts in terms of biodiversity.
The reintroduction of rainforest to Devon follows similar projects in North Wales and the Isle of Man, thanks to a £38 million fund from Aviva. Even though it will take centuries to create environments as rich as this, it is the latest step to protect and enhance Britain's diverse countryside. Dan Whitehead, Sky News, in South Devon.
Now, we're used to hearing stories of seabirds under threat from climate change, bird flu or overfishing. But there's one species in one place that's doing rather well, as Lisa Morgan tells us from the Welsh island of Scoma.
Scoma is the largest seabird colony in southern Britain. It has huge numbers of cliff nesting and burrow nesting seabirds. One in particular that it's quite famous for is the puffin. So Atlantic puffins breed here on Scoma in large numbers. Spring in March, when our wardens counted the population here, just before the start of the season and before birds go underground when we can't see them, they counted 42,000 individual birds, which is the largest count we've had post Second World War. So it's a really incredible number of puffins and an increasing population. Scoma is quite unusual in that it's bucking the trend of puffin populations just about everywhere else in their range, where they're really struggling and declining. You can see all the burrows around us here. Puffins breed underground in burrows, and so they're very vulnerable to predators on land. Scoma doesn't have any land predators, so there are no rats, no foxes, stoats, weasels, hedgehogs, nothing like that here, which has allowed these populations to increase so dramatically. So we are very conscious of the introduction of an invasive species, especially a brown rat, which would be disastrous for the birds here. Avian influenza has had a devastating impact on seabird colonies around the UK. We haven't had any positive cases here on Scoma or Skocum, but we have had cases nearby on Scoma Island, our gannet tree, which sits off the Pembrokeshire coast, very close to Scoma Island. So that's something we're very conscious of and we're very mindful of.
That's all for this show. We'll be back next week here in the Surrey Hills, which, believe it or not, is the latest frontier in a battle over oil and gas drilling. Remember, you can catch up on all your climate and environment news on the Sky News website and app, or by scanning the QR code that's just appeared on the screen. Bye for now.